Welcome to Ocean Ideas, the podcast from the Ocean Lovers Festival, where we dive deep into the wonders of our blue planet and the people working to protect it. In this episode, we explore the mesmerizing world of octopus, the ocean's deepest thinkers. Host Colette Beaudry is joined by scientist Dr. Alex Schnell, philosopher Peter Godfrey Smith, and cinematographer Adam Geiger to unpack animal intelligence, consciousness, and our connection to the sea.
You now know we've got two scientists with us and a filmmaker and underwater cinematographer who's also a marine scientist. And all three of them have spent an awful lot of time with octopus. I wanted to start by asking Alex, if I could. Really what we wanted to talk about today, we've talked about this together, is there are 300 species of octopus. They're all amazing in many ways. But what we want to focus on with this talk today is the importance of sentience and intelligence in the natural world at a time when there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and sort of the importance of consciousness, sentience, nature's intelligence, and how far science has come in recognizing that in animals, the octopus being a great poster child for smart animals. Alex, I wanted to ask you, you've explored this topic throughout your career. Have you always believed that animals have thinking minds?
As a young girl, I didn't really question it. I assumed that every animal had a mind of their own. And when I entered university, those topics were not discussed. Sentience, or the capacity to feel emotions, that's what it means, or animal consciousness, they weren't in the curriculum because they were considered not serious science and we weren't taught about it. And even as little as 10 years ago, we would go to these conferences and academics would present on topics like what animals can remember, look at their sleeping states that look like dreaming states, can they plan for future scenarios? But what we didn't talk about is what those findings in animal minds directly implies, because in humans, those abilities are linked to consciousness. But scientists were hesitant and they didn't want to draw the same conclusions. So it was like this unspoken pink elephant in the room. And even though I think we're just emerging on this topic, there's been a lot of advances in the past 10 years. And in humans, we usually confirm these sorts of experiences through language. And so that there's a barrier for animals because we can't verbally confirm their experiences. But we've developed these criteria that are based on brain architecture. So do they have the brain, the neural networks to be able to experience different conscious states? Do they show the behaviours? And with that criteria, we've showed increasing evidence, not just with animals that are closely related to us, like primates or other types of mammals, but as far-reaching as crustaceans and cephalopods, fish and insects. And so the tide is turning. And it was last year that I attended the Emerging Science of Animal Consciousness in New York, and hundreds of academics got together and we signed this Declaration of Consciousness to include other animals besides mammals and birds. And so I think we're in a modern-day Copernican revolution. Just as Copernicus challenged the idea that Earth was the centre of the universe, we've got science and animal consciousness forcing us to reconsider this long-held belief that humans are the only beings that can experience conscious states. And with that recognition, it really has profound implications for the way that we understand animals and the way that we treat them.
Beautiful, beautiful. Peter, would you like to speak to that as the author of a book called Other Minds, in relation to octopus particularly, but in general, the evolution of consciousness as you've studied it and written about it?
Sure. The big initial fact about octopus is their relation to us in evolutionary terms, because it's so distant. It's such a long way back in time that you have to go before you reach a common ancestor of us and an octopus. And all animals are related by common ancestry to various degrees of depth. And in the octopus case, you're going back something like 570 or 600 million years, very early in the history of animal life. Not early in the history of life, but early in the history of animals. So you have these deep branchings in evolution, and nervous systems and brains and action and perception evolve in various forms on those branches. In the case of the octopus, we have something extraordinary, which is a very large-brained, very complex behaving animal that's separated from us by this enormous gulf. And that makes it natural to ask, well, what do you get if evolution builds minds again on a different branch from our branch? What you get, I think, is firstly a fascinating set of similarities and differences from us. And I'll mention one or two of those, but then I wanted to pick up especially the comment you made about artificial intelligence and the relationship between sentience and intelligence a moment ago. In the octopus branch of the evolution of minds, you have, at least in some species, including our local bloomy octopuses right near where we are now, you have a kind of inquisitive, engaged mode of being. They like new things, they're interested in people, they're attentive, they're curious, and so on. Pretty good learners, and all of that seems very recognisable in relation to ourselves, but the body is so extraordinary, and the place that the brain and nervous system, and hence the mind, have within the body is very different from us. It's more decentralised, there's this sensitivity across the whole body. Everything that's touched is tasted. It's a light-sensitive skin, it seems, and there's less of a centred, controlling CEO. So it's a different kind of mind in some ways, and a similar kind of mind in others. That combination of features, I think, helps us with one of the things that you asked about a moment ago. It was, I think, already reasonable to believe that sentience and intelligence are pretty distinct things. You really have two questions to ask about any system here. Is it probably sentient, and how intelligent is it?
Which means I want to ask Adam a question too, because this is about this sense of feeling within this animal, this sentience. Adam is somebody who's spent decades filming natural history, and a lot of it underwater, hundreds of hours with individual octopus. What defining moments have influenced your perspective about animals as thinking beings?
I think I've always felt that animals, especially mammals, are thinking, that they're not just biological robots. Even spending hours filming them, capturing natural behavior, there's always the argument, this is they're adapted to do this, or they're flexible to change in certain situations. But I think what a couple of incidents really got me thinking more about what is going on inside those minds. And one of them is really simple. I was working on a film, shooting on a coral reef, and focused with my camera aimed at whatever I was filming, and a pair of jacks, which are generally pelagic fish, came cruising along and stopped. And literally, I could see them lean over to look at what I was doing, and think, you could almost hear it. What the hell is this thing? And they watched me for a few moments and then swam off. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, if they were just reactive to things in their environment, they might not recognize a scuba diver or a diver, but they would just swim away. They wouldn't risk being in a place where they might be in danger. But that's not what happened. And then something else that really piqued my interest and awareness of this is that I was diving here locally under a pier and found two octopus, and male and female. And one was, they were very close to each other. They probably had been mating or were going to. And one octopus was doing the cleaning action with their arms. It looked very much like that, just twirling their arms like this. And I was very close to these animals with my camera, and I realized that this was going on a little bit too long, and I just stopped and I looked, and I realized that there was a fishing hook in the webbing between two arms. And I was trying to figure out what could I do about this. And this just blew me away, that I actually just got closer, and that octopus, with the other one right next to it, they didn't move, and they actually let me touch that, try to get that hook out. So there was obviously a recognition going on in that brain that I was not a threat, that in fact maybe I was going to help it, and that just took, from my perception, it took animals out of, yes, sure, they're more than just robots, they think, they observe their environment, to actually having thought process. And that's my personal experience. I'm not the scientist, these two are. But I think octopus are a brilliant example of something that, a type of mind that we really can't put our own minds around because they're so different, and their bodies are so different. Yet they can express emotion, they can express curiosity, they can do all of these things that I think, as Alex said, is leading to a revolution of how we look at the natural world.
I just want to say one thing to put to the three of you now. With one of the things that Peter said was about this tactile intelligence, because they've got brains in their arms and their skin, and as a time when we are appreciating our own sensitivities to the world, how do we start to respect this type of intelligence? This octopus is leading away in appreciating this other type of mind.
One thing I would use to respond to that would be picking up one of the thoughts that Adam just had. Curiosity in animals is so interesting. It's such a noteworthy feature. And if we're wondering what it takes for a person to go beyond thinking, okay, this thing is pretty complicated, but it's not me, I don't care about it that much. When an animal is curious, a non-human animal is curious about you, when they have that kind of engagement with you, that induces you to look at yourself through their eyes momentarily and think, yeah, I really must look like a very strange object down here. I can see why it would be sensible to be curious about me. Those moments, I think, are quite special, not just in the project of trying to work out what's going on inside them, but trying to find ways to form different kinds of relationships with non-human animals.
Yes. Yes.
I think what I'll just add is, I think recognising other minds and how their intelligence is different I'll go a little bit on a tangent here, but can really help us respect intelligence across the spectrum, even within humans. These animals on the evolutionary tree, as Peter was saying, they've probably evolved multiple times, the different minds, because of the different pressures that they've experienced in their environment. But even though they have really different brains, like an octopus brain is a donut shaped and it's a hole right in the middle where their throat goes, and 2/3 of their neurons are in their arms, but they still show similar solutions to the same problems. And so that in itself, I think, is so fascinating, that even with a completely different hardware, they're coming up with the same sorts of solutions. And so it helps us recognise that there are different types of intelligence. And even if you might think differently and you might operate differently, you're coming up with familiar types of traits that we recognise in ourselves.
Having spent a lot of time filming individual octopus in various places, the rapidity with which they recognize you. Initially, they're observant, a bit standoffish, checking you out, wanting to know what's going on. They don't move much because if they leave their protection of their den, they're very vulnerable. But very quickly, they assess that you are not a threat. It's just amazing. If an octopus can do that, lots of other animals, I'm sure, are doing the same thing. We're just not tuned in to recognize it and to appreciate it. And that's what I think we need. The big turning point humanity needs is to realize we're part of the natural world, not above it at this point.
I think that's a beautiful moment for me to want to ask Alex one more conservation question to turn it back to that. So can you give me, Alex, a conservation thought for all of us based on leading off from what Adam said?
I think animals like the octopus are the perfect ambassador to start making us think about why we would want to protect the ocean and all these critters and their fragile ecosystems. I think there's been a certain formula in documentaries over the past 20 years where we walk away feeling overwhelmed at the state of the oceans, the plastic pollution, climate change, weather systems, and you feel so overwhelmed that there's feelings of shame and all negative feelings, and then in the end, maybe even defiance of being like, well, what can one person do? What am I going to do? What I try and do, I think, when I talk about different animals in the ocean, especially the octopus, is I want to foster empathy and compassion. I want people to fall in love with that animal because that brings feelings, positive feelings. And when you have those positive feelings, you want action and you think outside the box of how you can change certain behaviours to make the ocean a better place, to protect the ocean. We want to protect what we love. And so I think that's the avenue for how we can think about conservation, is really trying to get on the same level as the animals that we're swimming with, feeling empathy and compassion for those animals, and then wanting to protect their home.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Ocean Ideas, brought to you by the Ocean Lovers Festival, Australia's largest celebration of ocean culture, science, and sustainability. If this episode sparked new thoughts about the minds beneath the sea, dive deeper at oceanloversfestival.com. Explore our talks, programs, and experiences, and join a community turning love for the ocean into action.